All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're heading down south to Maycomb, Alabama, to be exact. We've got excerpts from Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird.
Ugh.
And, well, I guess our mission today is to really understand Maycomb, not just as, like, the background for the story, but as a character almost.
Yeah, you know what's so interesting about it is that Maycomb isn't this sweet little idyllic town.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Lee really gives us all these super vivid details, like the streets. The streets get all muddy and red when it rains, and like the courthouse is literally sinking into the town square. And then the heat. Oh my gosh, the heat. It's like you could just feel it. It's almost claustrophobic, you know?
Yeah, no, totally. It's like you could reach out and touch it, like touch that dusty road. And you really get this feeling that Maycomb is like its own little world. It's completely isolated, right? They grow everything they need except ice and
Right.
wheat flour
Right.
and clothing. They had to have riverboats bring that stuff in.
Totally. Like totally self-sufficient. But that also means it's really isolated. And that isolation, it breeds a certain way of thinking. It makes people resistant to change. And that's a huge part of why everything in the book happens the way it does.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of resisting change, let's talk about the Finches. Scout's family history in Maycomb goes way back, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure. Definitely. You know, her ancestor, Simon Finch, he founded Finch's Landing.
Mm-hmm.
And like for generations, all the men just stayed there, made their living from cotton. You know, that was it. But Atticus, Scout's father, he breaks the mold. He goes off and studies law, and then he chooses to come back to Maycomb to be a lawyer. It's kind of subtle, but Lee is already hinting that something is off, like there's this clash between tradition and progress.
Yeah, and it's not just him. His brother goes off to study medicine, breaks tradition too, makes you wonder, like, what their dad thought of all that.
Right, like both his sons just leaving Finch's Landing. And I think it makes you think about how Atticus's life shaped him, his worldview.
Yeah.
You know, especially later when he takes on Tom Robinson's case.
Yeah.
He's already shown that he's not afraid to challenge the way things are.
Makes sense. We also can't forget Aunt Alexandra, right? She moves in with them and just brings all these hardcore Southern values.
Right. Yeah, she's a fascinating contrast to Atticus, almost like this conflict within the family, you know, like mirroring the bigger conflicts happening in Maycomb itself.
Okay, so now let's talk about the elephant, or should I say phantom, in the room. Boo Radley. He feels like more than just some recluse. Like he's a legend in Maycomb, almost.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You know the Radley place, like with its yard all overgrown and the windows boarded up. It's like a physical, real-life version of the town's fears and secrets.
Yeah.
And all those rumors about Moo, like stabbing his father and eating cats and being a ghost, basically. It's like they're putting all their anxieties onto him,
Yeah.
onto this guy nobody even sees.
That's so true. It reminds me of how sometimes we make monsters out of what we don't understand.
You got it, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's that fear of the unknown that makes the kids so obsessed with Boo. They want to see him, make him come out. But they're kind of terrified at the same time.
It's like they're drawn to it and scared of it all at the same time. I also notice how even the stuff around the Radley place is treated differently. Like those pecans growing in the yard, people said they were poisonous. And like if a baseball landed in their yard, it was like game over. You couldn't even try to get it back.
Oh, yeah. It's like the Radley place is this line you can't cross.
Yeah.
Like there will be consequences. Lee is so good at using those little things to make you feel uneasy.
Okay, let's switch gears for a second. Let's talk about Scout starting school. It wasn't exactly a picnic for her, was it?
Nope, definitely not. You know her first grade teacher, Miss Caroline? She's like this perfect example of old ways clashing with new ideas. Scout can already read. But Miss Caroline, she's all about her fancy new way of teaching, and she makes Scout start from scratch. It's almost funny, but it shows you how stuck in their ways they are in Maycomb.
I see what you mean, yeah. And then there's that thing with Walter Cunningham, her classmate that can't afford lunch. It's such a small thing, but it says so much about how Maycomb works.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You see, Scout's first reaction is like totally based on how she was raised.
Yeah.
And then Calpurnia comes in, and she's like, girl, you need to understand where he's coming from. It's subtle, but it's powerful. Like, here's this theme of social class, bam.
It's true, yeah. And the fact that Scout learned to write from Calpurnia is interesting, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes the best lessons come from where you least expect it. Not always the classroom, you know?
Yeah, I like that. So we can't talk about Scout without talking about Atticus. He's clearly way more than just her dad. He's like her moral compass.
Oh, 100%. Atticus is always pushing Scout to see things differently. And us, the readers, too. His focus on empathy and understanding is so important, especially in a town like Maycomb where prejudice is everywhere.
Like when he defends Calpurnia to Aunt Alexandra, like really makes it clear that Calpurnia is family.
Oh, yeah, that was a great moment. That shows what Atticus is all about. He's not just talking about equality. He's living it, even when it makes people mad.
It's true. And then there's that whole thing with the rabid dog. Atticus, the deadest shot in Maycomb County, suddenly has to step up.
Oh, that scene. It's so much more than just Atticus being a good shot. It shows how humble he is. Like, he doesn't want to use violence unless he has to. And it's almost like foreshadowing for when he defends Tom Robinson. You know, he knows people are going to hate him for it, but he's willing to fight for what's right. It's like he's taking on another rabid dog, but this time it's metaphorical.
Wow, yeah. You're right. So that brings us to the core of the book, I think. Tom Robinson's trial. It's like all the racial tension comes to a head. But we've been going for a while now. Maybe we should take a quick break and come back to the trial after.
Yeah, good idea. That trial is where things really start to unravel in Maycomb. Like, you see what's underneath the surface. You know, that trial, it's not just some courtroom drama. It's like a mini version of the whole South back then. Like, all those racial tensions playing out right there.
Oh, yeah. You really feel that. It's like the whole town is just watching and waiting, like holding their breath to see what's going to happen. And you're right there with Scout, trying to make sense of it.
It's tense. But what makes it even better is that Lee doesn't try to make it simple. You know, it's complicated. You've got the Ewells. Like, they're clearly at the bottom of the pile in Maycomb.
Yeah, poor, considered trash. But they're still white, and that gives them power, right?
Exactly. Like, their whiteness matters more than anything. And that's why Tom's in trouble. His word, a black man's word, means nothing against a white woman. Even though Mayella, her story doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. Like, you just want to scream. It's so obvious they're setting him up because he's black.
And that guilty verdict, even with no evidence, it just breaks your heart. It's like any hope that things might be fair, it's gone.
Yeah, that's rough. But then that moment when all the black people in the courtroom stand up as Atticus is leaving, I mean, talk about powerful.
Right. So powerful. Their silence, it says everything. It's like, thank you, Atticus, for trying. We respect you, even though the system failed us.
Oh, man, yeah. And you see how the trial messes with Jem, right? Like, he's not a little kid anymore.
Oh, definitely. He sees how messed up the world is, and it hurts. Remember when Scout wants to invite Walter Cunningham over, and Jem freaks out? He's still trying to figure out, like, what's right, you know, how to be a good person when everyone else is so messed up.
It's like that trial showed him the real world, you know?
Totally. Lee is so good at showing that transition from, like, childhood innocence to seeing how things really are.
So true. Okay, so the trial is like the big thing, obviously. But Lee also looks at prejudice in other ways, right?
Yeah, definitely. Look at Calpurnia. She's not just the housekeeper. She's like a mother to Scout and Jem.
Yeah.
And this link between the white and black communities.
Right, I noticed that. Like, she talks differently around other black people.
Right, it's called code switching. Basically, black people had to learn to act differently around white people, to fit in, to survive.
Wow. So, like, always having to change how you are depending on who's around.
Exactly. And it makes Calpurnia even more interesting. She's always navigating both worlds.
It's true. It also makes you think prejudice isn't always super obvious. Like, it can be little things, too.
Yeah, like how you talk. Lee is so good at showing those little things that you might not even notice, but they still matter.
Okay, so we've been talking about all this heavy stuff. Maybe something a bit lighter for a second. What about Miss Maudie Atkinson? She's like a breath of fresh air in all this.
Oh, she's the best. So strong and funny, and she's not afraid to say what she thinks.
Yeah, she's like the opposite of Aunt Alexandra.
Exactly. Like, she doesn't care about those old rules for how women are supposed to act.
I loved that line she had about how foot washers think anything fun is a sin.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one. His Maudie shows that even in Maycomb. Some people are different or open-minded.
For sure. And the kids are funny, too. Like that whole snowman thing during the snowstorm.
Yeah, classic kid stuff. Even with all the bad stuff happening, there's still room for fun.
It's a good balance. And then Atticus makes Jem change the snowman so it doesn't offend Mr. Avery.
Right. Like, even if you disagree with someone, you got to be respectful.
I like that. Okay, so back to my Ella Ewell for a minute. She's kind of the bad guy, right? But maybe there's more to it.
You know, I think you're right. She's a product of her environment, you know? Poor, abused, no way out.
Yeah, she's desperate.
And that accusation against Tom, maybe it was her trying to change things, even though it's awful.
Like hurting someone else to try and help herself?
It's complicated, but it makes you think, you know? Sometimes the people who do bad things are victims too.
And it makes Tom's conviction even worse.
For sure. He's just a scapegoat for Mayella's pain, and the whole town is to blame.
We've covered so much, the setting, the characters, the trial, all that prejudice and injustice. And we haven't even gotten to Boo Radley coming out of the shadows yet.
Yeah, that's where it all comes together. But before we get there, I think we should talk about the Radley place itself. It's not just a creepy house. It means something.
Oh, I like where this is going. What do you think Lee is doing with the Radley place?
Think about it.
Hmm.
It's mysterious, scary, unknown, but it's also a safe place, eventually. It's almost like Maycomb itself,
Yeah.
with all its secrets and good and bad stuff.
That's a great point. It's both scary and interesting at the same time. Like, sometimes the things we fear the most aren't that bad. Or sometimes the real danger is right in front of us, like all that prejudice and stuff. You know, you're so right about the Radley place being important. And then there's that attack on Scout and Jem, right? Like, that's when everything about the Radley place changes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That walk back from the Halloween pageant, it's terrifying.
Hmm.
It's like all the stuff we've been talking about, innocence and fear and prejudice, it all comes together. And then there's Boo right in the middle of it.
Yeah, like we've been saying, he's this almost mythical figure. And then, boom, he's real. He's saving Jem's life. What do you think Lee's doing there with that shift?
I think she's making us look at our own ideas about Boo.
Mm.
We've been scared of him, just like the kids. But suddenly he's the hero. He's not a monster anymore. He's a person.
It's like we finally see him for who he is. And Scout, too, right? She's only ever known him as this scary story. And then she's holding his hand, leading him home.
Yeah, exactly. It's like she's bringing him back into the world.
Mm.
And she's not scared anymore.
Then there's Sheriff Tate saying Bob Ewell fell on his own knave. It's a tough one, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Some people would say it's not real justice. But I think Lee wants us to think about it differently. Like, what's the right thing to do? To protect Boo, who just wanted to help? Or to put him through this whole trial in a town that's already shown how unfair it can be?
Yeah, it's like sometimes the law isn't enough. Sometimes you need compassion.
Exactly. And Scout gets it, even though she's just a kid. She knows it's right to protect Boo.
That last scene with Scout on the Radley porch, it's like she sees the world through his eyes. All that time he spent alone, all the little things he did to help.
It's beautiful. It's like she finally understands him. And it reminds us that we should try to see things from other people's perspectives, even if they're different from us.
It's interesting. We've been talking about all this heavy stuff like racism and prejudice, but there's also this hope in To Kill a Mockingbird, this feeling that people can be good.
Oh, yeah. Like Scout and Jem believing in their dad no matter what. Or Miss Maudie always finding the good stuff, even after her house burns down.
It's like even when things are bad, these characters never give up.
That's what makes this book so amazing. It's about being good, even when it's hard. There are always going to be people like Atticus and Scout and Miss Maudie fighting for what's right.
Yeah, it makes you want to do the same. Like, it's our job to fight injustice, too.
Totally. Lee's not just telling a story. She's saying, hey, you got to do something too. Like, look at yourself. See if you're part of the problem. And then be brave and do what's right.
To Kill a Mockingbird, it's not just a book. It's like a guidebook, almost. It shows
Yeah.
you how to be better.
I love that. It really makes you think, and it stays with you. It makes you want to be a better person.
Well said. Thanks for coming on this deep dive with us exploring To Kill a Mockingbird. Hopefully, it's given everyone some food for thought and maybe even started some conversations. Keep thinking, keep learning, and let's all try to make the world a little better, one step at a time. See you next time.